Hello everyone, it's Mills here from leadersoftheheart.com, and today is the 25th of April 2017. Now this date may not mean much to you, but the 25th of April is a date which is kind of ingrained in my memory. Why? Because it's the day that I survived the Nepali earthquake I was in Kathmandu at the time with my now husband, Chotu. So today is a day that I always thank God, basically, that we are still alive. It's a day I always reflect on what happened and how blessed we are to have been saved. And it's a day that I also want to read you a story about it. So over the years, I've said bits and bobs about the earthquake, but nothing too much really. And the most that I've said to date has been in this beautiful book, Hensel Then and Now, Patterns of Life in a North Yorkshire Village. Now, this is the most incredible book written. Well, it was edited by my mum and dad, Michael and Barbara Wright. My father did write some of the stories, though some of the stories he got other people to write, and they basically created their own stories. So it's a collection of stories and accounts of people's lives, all from the village where my dad lives. So at the beginning he says, "We dedicate this book to the people of Hensel, past and present, who, through their warmth and energy, have built a rich and vibrant village community. Such a great place to live." How gorgeous is that? And there's just so many different chapters and incredible people in this village that all get a chance to share their story. So history of the village, different things to do with industry and the railways and education, young people in the village, people to do with the war, the First World War, the Second World War, people who have gone to live abroad from the village, and so on. So my dad asked me to write a chapter in the book to do with my own story, and with what happened when I was in Nepal, we decided actually that was probably the best story to tell. So what I'd like to do today is just read you my story that's written in the book. And I have to say, since I wrote the story several years ago, I've actually never ever looked back at it. For some reason, I haven't been able to read it again. So this reading that I'm about to do is actually the first time I've ever read it in the book, and have ever read it since I wrote it. So please forgive me if I stumble across some of the words. Okay. From Greece to Nepal, an earthquake survivor's story. Being caught up in the Nepal earthquake in April 2015 was the most terrifying time of my life. It occurred suddenly around lunchtime on the 25th of April 2015. I was in Kathmandu with Chotu, my fiancé. In an instant, our world and our lives were turned upside down. Over 8,000 people were killed and around 22,000 injured. Hundreds of thousands were made homeless. Villages and World Heritage sites were flattened. Damage was estimated at $10 billion. Aftershocks occurred every 15 to 30 minutes. A waking nightmare. How did I come to this? Growing up with parents who loved to travel, I guess it was pretty natural I should get the travel bug myself. My childhood summers were spent having adventures abroad. I adored meeting people from all over the world and having fun on different beaches. So, as a grown-up, I wanted to do more of the same. At 18, I told my friends and family I was going to take time out before university and live on a Greek island. Nobody believed me. But I did it. 3 years on, having learnt Greek, lived on various beaches and become fascinated by language, I came back to read linguistics, which is the scientific study of language, at university. My parents were delighted. They were worried I was going to be a beach bum forever. During my university days, I lived in international halls of residence and learned about the food, the music, and the traditions of different countries. I remember some beautiful women from Mozambique being so confused when the sun went down at 4 pm. In their country, the setting of the sun meant time for sleep. After gaining my degree, I enjoyed living and teaching in Italy. My cat's coming. I enjoyed living and teaching in Italy, but my thirst to know more about linguistics led me to return to university. After successfully completing an MA and a PhD, I spent several months travelling in Thailand before returning to secure a job in teaching clinical linguistics to speech and language therapy students in the UK. But my free-spirited travelling days were far from over. As a senior lecturer with a generous holiday allowance, I continued to travel whenever I could. I spent a lot of time in Morocco, where I became fascinated by the music of Gnawa and began to connect more deeply with my own spirituality. But soon after, I knew that India was calling my name. I first went to India for a Christmas holiday in 2013. I chose Goa as it's hot then and I wanted some sea and some sun. But what was supposed to be just a 3-week break ended up changing my whole world. In 2012, I had a bicycle accident and life hasn't been the same for me since. Having been in Goa, I knew that India would be the place I could heal and find myself again. So I took a year's unpaid leave and flew to India on a one-way ticket. This was not a year's leave. It was a stepping out in faith to be led by God to where I needed to be. 2 weeks after arriving in India, I went to Jaisalmer, a traditional town in West Rajasthan, to take a camel safari. There, I met a warm-hearted man from the desert, known affectionately as Chotu. We fell in love. Less than 4 months later, on my 40th birthday, I said the happiest yes of my life and accepted his proposal of marriage. In the meantime, we'd signed a lease on a hotel in Jaisalmer and were already committed to a life together. In April 2015, Chotu and I travelled to Nepal as I had to renew my Indian visa. We had a wonderful 2-week holiday there with my sister Abigail, who came out to holiday with us. When she flew home, Chotu and I stayed in Kathmandu to sort my visa out. We were due to open our Golden Marigold Hotel in Jaisalmer on 1st of July 2015. But life took a different turn. On April 25, 2015, the day after my sister flew home, a massive earthquake struck Nepal. Chotu and I were separated when it happened, as he'd gone down the road for a street chai, which is a spiced tea. First, there was a massive rumbling sound from underground. Moments later, the whole world seemed to warp. The ground began to move. Everything started to smash. People screamed. Events happened in slow motion. As I stumbled up to my feet, my mind told me, "You're in an earthquake and nowhere is safe." I don't recall how I got to the ground next to the swaying tree, but I stayed there under a table holding hands with some strangers. Eventually Chotu returned, his hair full of debris, his eyes filled with fear. He had run through the earthquake to die in my arms. But we didn't die. I later walked down to the tower, which had collapsed with people beneath it. About 100 men were standing on the rubble, watching the army use 2 picks and a spade to try and dig out any survivors. I gathered a few men to help, and we used our hands to throw aside some of the rubble. But it was so deep and so compact that our efforts were futile. Next day, I took the 20-minute walk to Kathmandu's Durbar Square. Utter devastation. 80% of its temples were destroyed. Mountains of rubble were everywhere. As I thought to return to the hotel, the ground started shaking. Tremors happened frequently, but this was different. Another earthquake. I was surrounded by high buildings and there seemed no way out. Bricks began to fall. People were screaming, crying, and hugging each other as the ground rumbled and shook. Buildings around me collapsed. In these moments, you realise how fragile life is, that your next decision could either save your life or lead to your death. Slowly, after several hours, I managed to reach the relative safety of an open street. Eventually, I reached Chotu, who'd been anxious about my safety, and I decided not to leave his side again. We spent 5 days and nights on the streets of Kathmandu, as the British Embassy could not accommodate Chotu, and the Indian Embassy could not accommodate me. We both wanted to be sure the other was safe before being separated. Eventually, Chotu was given a place on an Indian rescue flight, and I came out on the first rescue flight to England. What a relief to be met by my family at Stansted Airport and to be alive to tell our story. Since then, we've opened our hotel in India. I came back to take up my role again at university, and in April 2016, Chotu and I were married in Hensel's lovely parish church. And it's not in the book, but I have to say that my father did the ceremony for us, and it was the most beautiful day of our lives. Thank you for listening to my story. Namaste.